Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's extraordinary statement that the government are not actually going to deal with the goodness knows how many collapsing schools, hospitals and other public buildings, even though this is all down to their failure to maintain building programmes over the last 13 years, and the public know that. At this point, I really can't argue with people who think the Tories actually want to lose the election. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So this is incredible, because the Tories basically stopped replacing public buildings, including, topically at the moment, schools, when they came to the end of their life. We now have hundreds of buildings all in imminent danger of collapsing, and not just collapsing onto either children or patients. Now, if that were to actually happen, I cannot think of a story more damaging to the government responsible. I said recently that the government have no good way out of this now. All they can do is mitigate the damage, and they get no credit for doing that because it's essentially clearing up their own mess. It's their fault that this critical emergency is now upon us. But they would at least have to commit to a programme of repairing and rebuilding the affected schools and hospitals. It would be impossible to fix it all before the election. Of course, you can't do it in a year. But they would surely at least need a schedule to be released with work on the highest priority cases actually having begun. That's what they'd need to be able to convince voters that they're serious about it. They'd need to have started some work, and they'd need a schedule so that people could see in their local area, oh, you know, in like 2026, this is going to be done. And in the meantime, this is what's going to be done to stop it falling on our children. You know, after all, imagine how voters who are already getting ready to boot the Tories out, because that's the default position. The Tories are losing. Before this scandal, the Tories were losing. Imagine how those voters are feeling if the government say, sorry, we're not going to fund the replacement of these crumbling schools and hospitals. Those voters have already given them the money to do it. They've been paying their taxes. The tax rate at the moment is the highest it's been for generations. And it's still going up, by the way, because it's not just about the tax bands. The tax allowance, the tax-free allowance has been frozen, which means in real terms it's coming down, which means your income tax is going up every year. Red Wall Tories especially may as well just pack up now. They had little enough chance before, being honest, but this would finish them. But it's also not great for Tories in any constituency where there are affected schools, or even suspected schools, or schools that may be affected in a few years. So imagine my surprise when I see the news this morning. Jeremy Hunt says that he will make schools safe at any cost. And you think, well, he's got to say that, hasn't he? At the very least. I wonder how they're going to pay for it. Then he says there'll be no new money for it. You what? The reason these buildings are now collapsing is because the Tories didn't provide the money to replace them when it would have been cheaper to do so. You know, when they reached the end of their expected life, when they were still standing. Some sections of the mainstream media are also reminding us that Rishi Sunak, then Chancellor but now Prime Minister, halved the budgets for school repairs. So we had a budget for school repairs that already wasn't enough. It wasn't just Rishi Sunak. It had been reduced ever since David Cameron came in. But we'd had a budget for school repairs that was already not enough. And this is evident because the buildings weren't being replaced when they should have been. And then this already not enough, Sunak halved it. And now the chickens of this ill thought out policy have come home to roost. And the Tories are forced to at least begin dealing with it if they want any chance of limiting the damage in the election. And they're telling us that not a single penny will be found to work on clearing up their mess. I mean, Labour really need to, they absolutely must be saying to people, you have paid for these buildings. You paid it in taxes. You're paying really high taxes. The rate of tax is really high. What are you getting for that money? Because under Labour, you paid a lower rate of tax and you had new school buildings. Where's your money going? They need to keep making this point every time they sit in front of a journalist. It doesn't matter what questions that journalists ask them. Every interview they go to, every time they stand up in Parliament to talk to a Secretary of State or the Prime Minister, they need to be making this point to people. Where's your money gone? Because we've paid that money. Where's it gone? I mean, this is the situation politically. Right now, about 3/4 of the current Conservative constituencies are under threat at the next election. Now, I'm not suggesting they're going to lose 3/4 of them. But that's how many will have a fight on their hands. Some of those fights will be won. There are several dozen Tory MPs standing down at the next election, so they may not care. There will be others planning to do so, but who haven't said yet, so they may not care either. But that must still leave a good 200 Tory MPs who intend to fight for their seats. Their seat is going to require a fight. Their seats are vulnerable, basically. And their Chancellor has just said that a hospital or school can fall down for all they care, and he will not source any funding, no emergency funding to deal with it. Go and have your lessons and operations in a field or something. The Tory MPs most screwed over by this, of course, will be ones with known problems in their constituency. But even if they're not, it's still a problem, because local voters may wonder themselves, well, our local school may be fine. It had a new bill 20 years ago under Labour. But what if a problem developed within that school in the next few years? The government have basically said, we're not going to fund the repairs or replacement if the money cannot be found in this already depleted budget. And given that the money in those budgets wasn't enough to help the schools and hospitals that are actually crumbling now, why would it be for others later on? Jeremy Hunt has basically told the electorate, if you want money to maintain public buildings like schools and hospitals, you need a Labour government, because the Tory government won't do it. Put it this way, last week I talked about how Sunak's chief of staff told any special advisors in Downing Street who didn't believe the Tories could win the next election to quit their jobs. The following day, Sunak's chief of communications did just that. Well, if there are any advisors left in Downing Street after this announcement from Hunt who think they can still win, they are completely out of touch, more so than I thought. And this isn't even a problem that is loaded up in Labour voting areas. It's not like, you can ignore it because they vote Labour anyway. The reports at the weekend said the most affected council was Essex. Now, that is a very strong Conservative council. It's also Priti Patel's stomping ground. She has been urging the government to find some money to deal with this. I imagine lots of Tory MPs will be. They certainly should be. In fact, never mind their precious tax cuts. They should be demanding this be dealt with. Simply not feasible to go into an election with schools and hospitals crumbling and expect voters to back you anywhere. Do you remember 2019 when Boris Johnson promised 40 new hospitals? Now, we were never getting them, of course, we know that. The only people surprised that we haven't got them, that not a single one, by the way, has emerged, are those who fell for the lies. Those of us who knew what he and the Tories are like, not in the least surprised we didn't get a single one, never mind 40. But the reason he promised them was because he knew it would win over voters. Well, shall we extrapolate that notion? If promising to build new hospitals wins you votes, what on earth does Sunak think is the result when you promise to let hospitals just collapse with no money for replacement? Is he capable of extrapolation? He's an investment banker. He should be good with numbers. In fact, speaking of Johnson's new hospitals, try this one on for size. While Matt Hancock was Health Secretary, he attended West Suffolk Hospital. He claimed it was one of the 40 new hospitals that the Tories promised in 2019. Here I am presenting one of our new hospitals. Well, guess what? This same supposedly new hospital has been revealed to be one of the worst affected by the aerated concrete problems. According to the health editor at the Times, which is a Tory paper, the hospital was assessed in April as being at catastrophic risk of collapse. This is one of the hospitals earmarked to be a new hospital. This is one of the Tories' 40 new hospitals. At catastrophic, that's a quote, catastrophic risk of collapse. Wes Streeting needs to get straight onto that one, assuming Starmer doesn't nick it for PMQs this week, because although there will be plenty of scandals building up over summer, surely this has to be the one that Starmer goes with this week, unless, goodness knows what can happen in the next 2 days. The difficulty, I think, will be picking just 6 face from palms to question Sunak about. It's electoral madness. I know people will say the Tories are just looking at ransacking the country. It's the final trolley dash now to stuff as much into their offshore bank accounts as they can before letting Labour come in, carry out some maintenance on the country before they come back. I get that. I absolutely get that there'll be Tories thinking that way. But in order to think that way, either they need to be like Sunak and have already made so much money they can then leave Parliament and that's fine. Or they need to be ones in very safe seats so that when they come back to power, assuming we don't change the electoral system, which would also be mad, but assuming they can come back in 10, 15 years' time, they still need to be Tory MPs to benefit. There are lots of Tory MPs who must recognise that if they lose their seat this time, they're not going to be the candidate in 10 or 15 years' time. They'll pick someone else because you've just lost an election. They won't be amongst that number. They won't profit. They need to keep their seats now. I mean, even 50 determined Tory MPs could force Hunt's hand here to do something. Are you seriously telling me there are not even 50 Tory MPs who understand the electoral damage being risked by openly stating that schools and hospitals can fall down and a Tory government will do absolutely nothing to prevent it? Madness. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.